Welcome to the Global Marketing Show, where we explore how language and culture impact global business. I'm Wendy Pease, your host and president of Rapport International. Let's get started. Welcome, listeners, to another episode of the Global Marketing Show. So today we've got a real global marketing expert that has come on. You're going to be excited to hear in all the places she's worked with and all the brands she's worked with. But before I get into her introduction, let me remind you that the podcast is brought to you by Rapport International, that provider of high quality written translation and spoken interpretation services in over 200 languages. And so today's tidbit is about learning languages. So, if you have a good translator, a good interpreter, you don't need to learn the languages, but different countries take different views on teaching languages in schools. In Luxembourg, language learning constitutes about 50% of educational time throughout a student's career. Students learn Luxembourgish, German, French, and English, and sometimes they even learn Latin, Spanish, and Italian. So if you think your school taught enough language, obviously you haven't gone to Luxembourg.
Yeah, that would be a great addition to the American school system, that's for sure.
Those of us with global marketing experience certainly think so. So, Jen Faucon.
Faucon. You're not the only one to mispronounce it. I don't take it personally.
I should have checked before I went to say it. Well, she's a strategic consultant at the USCIB Foundation, and they support the U.S. Council for International Business that represents businesses at the UN, and it works with the U.S. federal government across business. She's also a senior marketing strategist for a number of independent ad agencies, including DemandBright, a global growth marketing agency. She has worked at Ogilvy, McCann, BBDO, and Dentsu, and she's worked with large multinational clients like Microsoft, General Motors, Nestlé, Visa, MasterCard, and she's lived all over the world. So Jen, welcome.
I'm so thrilled, Wendy, that you reached out. You and I have met over the years at a lot of American Marketing Association events, but, we both really have a passion for global marketing and the importance of great communications in every culture and every language. So I'm thrilled to be here. And as you're listing off those clients, I think the thing that I'm most proud of in my career is I'm thinking about the people that I worked with and the relationships that I still have with those people, not only here in the US, but around the globe. So thrilled to be talking about, our joint passion of global marketing.
So what was one of your most memorable global marketing projects or initiatives that you worked on?
I'm trying to think which one to pull out of my hat. I'll start this way. I'm still very close with my clients at Nestlé in Malaysia, and I had worked at Nestlé globally out of their Pasadena office on big global campaigns. But I'm really proud of the work we did in Malaysia because we were able to take big global strategies and without a lot of money, make great impact in a market that really was under recognized, but had a very strong brand loyalty across Nestle. And we were bringing coffee to a tea drinking nation. And we came up with a strategy that was about giving samples and experiencing coffee in a new way. And this was before the big Starbucks revolution. And we decided, instead of trying to intercept the morning tea drinking behavior, is we looked at the afternoon social family community, which was very tied to the Malaysia marketplace. And we did a series of direct mail packages back in the day of direct mail and gave samples and then asked for their feedback. And we really ended up changing the entire strategy for Nescafe across the region because we weren't competing with the morning, which was tea. We looked at an entire region and created the afternoon experience, which then became the Starbucks revolution, the cafe revolution. So I'm really proud of that work. And we still talk about it on Facebook between those of us who worked on the campaign and our Nestle Malaysia clients, because it was so breakthrough and it was just about keeping it simple, using less budget, but using it wisely and getting feedback from the customers. So really old school relationship marketing, it's still what we need to do with any campaign of any size.
So how did you come up with that? Like, what was your process for entering that market and changing it?
Well, we had a pretty great relationship with Nestle around the globe, and I was based in Singapore. We flew up to Malaysia, which was an hour away, and we started to really talk about what we could do. And I've always been under the mindset that a great strategy can be executed at any cost. It doesn't have to be a $20 million Super Bowl ad. It can be about having $100,000 and using the information you had. And Nestle Malaysia already had a database of addresses around the country, both peninsulas. And I said, why don't we use that and use it for the tea drinkers, families of a certain age and location, and only do it for the quantity we can afford. And let's just think about it as three communications. When I'm doing strategy, I always think about the three hits. You don't want to do more than that or less. It's like, what are the three messages? The first one was try us. The second one was share us. And the third was buy us. And that's kind of the way we started it. And it was so successful in Malaysia. We were then flown down to South Africa to meet with all the emerging markets and talk about how to do things more simply, more nimbly, more strategically with not a lot of money. And then the Middle East started to roll out. Now those are major markets, but at the time they were still emerging. South Africa tested it, and they started trying that with every new product that was changing the market. And I think that's really important because when you come from a major market like the US and you've had a Super Bowl budget, people don't really take you seriously because they know you're going to be pushing more than they could do. I always think about it as capability, capacity, and what's smart and what can you measure. I don't need 20 million data points. I only need 3 survey questions to do something great. That's very against the new AI big data, but if you can't use all that information, why are you collecting it? And
Yeah.
your clients can prove to management that you have a good partner and you're very smart and very strategic. And we still talk to each other all the time that was a special time because we really felt we were working on something together. And of course, all my clients got promoted. That's all I care about. And my team did too, for thinking more strategically.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I mean, I love that creative idea and then breaking a tea market without a Boston Tea Party overthrow ship to get coffee involved is that's brilliant. Look for a different time of day when people need that pick me up. So Malaysia is a very interesting country that it's multilingual. So you have a database. How did you handle languages in that?
Languages are really challenging. Nestle and continues to be spectacular in how they capture data. Nestle did a 20-page survey to every household in Malaysia. It is unbelievable. And the thing is brands have a good reputation in other parts of the world. They don't see it as the way we might in the US as being breaking your privacy or being too invasive. They're looking for brands and services that are relevant to them. And so we were able to say, let's pull households of a certain income in a certain location. We wanted mid-level families. We weren't looking to make this a luxury product. We were looking to deeply understand, other products that they might be interested in. And so we were going to a receptive audience and they were open to us. And the other part that's interesting is we were able to ask what language people were interested in. And in Malaysia, you have certainly Bahasa Malay, you have English, and you have Mandarin and sometimes Cantonese. And you really need to make sure that your communications are in those specific languages. Sometimes the budget doesn't let you do all 3 languages because you're tripling your cost versus, say, the US, where you can pretty much go in English and maybe Spanish. And so sometimes we would say, let's only focus because of our budget on Bahasa, Malay. Let's only focus on that audience because that's where we think we'll make maybe the biggest impact, or because that's our budget limitation. So sometimes markets that have a requirement for multilingual have real issues because they have to make budget decisions.
Okay. And so so in that case, on the mailer that you did you do all four languages, or did you do, what did you do?
We did one. So for Nescafe, we decided to go after an English audience, English speaking, English writing audience, which is still a main language. I mean, you were just talking about the education system overseas. Most of the schools in Malaysia are dual or trilingual. But for other products, we did a lot around infant nutrition, around growing up milks, which is, for 2 to 10-year-olds. We went exclusively Bahasa, and maybe we do Bahasa in English. So we would make the decisions based on what we were trying to accomplish, what audience we were trying to reach, which peninsula we were speaking to, and that made a big difference.
Why did you choose Bahasa for the infant and milk things? Was there a culture, or was there something in your survey that you figured out?
Well, we wanted to reach a wider audience because it was around nutrition. And it was a very big priority of Nestle to make sure that they were providing great nutritional information about children and what they need in terms of probiotics and vitamins. And we knew we would get to more families at a middle to lower income if we focused on Bahasa. And that was a strategic and moral decision of the corporation.
Ah, okay. So
Nescafe was just coffee. Who's going to afford coffee in the afternoon? Let's go in English. But, Nestle split to Nestle and Nestle Nutrition while I was living in Asia the first time. And their requirements about their responsibilities of teaching people about proper portion sizes, nutrition, and especially their requirements of the WHO around infant nutrition were absolutely a priority, and they were a priority for us as a team and how we were going to communicate.
okay, so that brings us back to the work that you're doing now, which is how global marketing and policy overlap. And that's an area we really haven't talked about on the podcast. So was that your entree into that area, was through Nestle Nutrition?
Well, I'll tell you my background with a little bit of humor. I went to Tufts University as an undergrad. I'm very grateful for those 4 years. I started as an international relations major and I lasted a semester. I'm not that diplomatic. I'm definitely international business, but I didn't have the mindset around global politics. I really just didn't have that mindset as an 18-year-old. I was much more interested in creative and American politics. But when I was sent overseas, I had a deep personal passion for culture, communications. I obviously am very grateful that I thrived when I lived in Asia and the Middle East. Those were things that were really important to me. But working with companies like Nestle, working with the government of Dubai, working with Visa and MasterCard, who were building banking systems, automotive companies were building roads. So much of what I was seeing in the emerging world was really international development and the role of business and wanting to build great economies. I saw it across Southeast Asia and Vietnam and Malaysia, and of course, across the continent of Africa, as well as Central and Eastern Europe. But I've always been very interested in that, and I watched all these companies do that kind of work. So when I moved back to the US the second time, I started going to Babson for my MBA, and I started doing work at the Institute for Social Innovation. And Babson really believes that business skills are really critical to do great things and to help solve world problems, help nonprofits grow. All of that is very important. And at a chance meeting at the Institute for Social Innovation, I met the U.S. Council for International Business. And I started talking about some of the case studies you and I have just talked about. I talked about Nestle in Malaysia. I talked about building e-commerce across the Middle East for small businesses and emerging businesses, the roads that were being built. And they said, can you come on as, a consultant 10 hours a week. We want to build a new center for sustainable development. Sure, why not? I got 10 hours. And I help them create the business partners for sustainable development. We worked together on what the 4 pillars would look like. I worked with the ad agency to come up with the design and branding and website. And we went to the UN and we announced it. I have never had a moment like that in my life where my name is brought up in that space. And I thought to myself, here I am 18 years. I feel like I'm 18 years old again. And I knew that global was my thing. I just didn't know how my pieces fit together. And so it was communications and culture and development and business. And we launched Business Partners for Sustainable Development. I've now been with the foundation for 6.5 years. We did a coalition during COVID where we brought together business, nonprofits, NGOs, health organizations to help major business, as well as small businesses navigate COVID. Who am I in the middle of that? But really, it's about building coalitions, cross-cultural communications, cross-industry collaboration. And I look at that body of work over the last 6.5 years, and it's really the stuff you and I do every day. It's about bringing people together and looking at a creative challenge and finding great solutions and executing it well. It's the same skills, just in a public policy framework.
I get it with large companies. They're going to have the funding to go in and do policy and build, electronic banking systems and roads and access to power and, the cellular communication. What about small and mid-sized companies? How can they pull that in and marry policy with business?
Well, I'm not sure how to answer that. I think that's a huge challenge. I think that small to medium-sized businesses are the ones that are caught in the middle of everything. They don't have the big infrastructure to deal with these big global challenges, but they do have the nimbleness to change fast. There are big global announcements by some of these global organizations. I'll name them, like the International Labor Organization or the UN, that say everybody must have access to safety and health in the workplace. Well, what does a small business do with that? How do they implement these big grandiose statements? It's nearly impossible for them to do that. But for those of us who can communicate globally very, very well, the big international organizations work on projects like this to help small to medium-sized businesses do something about it. Whether they are HR policies or their best practices, we try to interpret some of those big global statements into something that small to medium as well as big multinationals can deal with. But these are not small challenges at all, and they're not always effective. And every market has its own government and local challenges.
Right. So I guess that's what it is partnering with the larger companies that might have the infrastructure, but then also understanding how the products and services that you offer may help the challenges of the local markets that you're going into. But it would be hard to pick a strategy, to build that strategy of I'm going to also do development without figuring out the market that's right for your product.
And some of the emerging markets like Nigeria, Indonesia, and I'm mentioning some specific countries because I just came back from UN General Assembly Week, where there were a lot of big side meetings with foreign policy around AI and technology. And great markets like Nigeria are changing their education systems so that their students can become great entrepreneurs and tech savvy. There are some markets like Singapore who have partnered to build entrepreneurs and to get some of these small businesses to be their real leaders in certain areas and investing in them so that these entrepreneurial organizations and companies can not just help solve problems, but help build economies and build great talent. So there's a lot of shifts happening that in a world that seems very unsteady right now, I'm actually much more inspired by these governments partnering locally than I am by these big global systems that are very hard to move. But on the ground, the governments that harness that are going to be the ones that see the power of what business can do.
Oh, that is an interesting. Okay, so if you're a small business owner, how would you tap into that?
The governments that are really raising that are doing great. I've met a lot of people at Babson who are from some of these countries, and they're not only running their own business, they're running a corresponding nonprofit and bringing it back to their home country and building great things. What I've learned working with a lot of nonprofits is the way you and I see nonprofit in the US is not the way it runs around the globe. But our model of this 501c3 is coming back to emerging markets, and they're like, wow, I could have an innovative nonprofit that brings innovation to social justice issues. So I'm seeing a lot of that kind of American nonprofit thought process and structure going to a lot of emerging markets that tend to rely on what's called an NGO, big non-government organization. These new nonprofits are part profit, part innovation, part 501c3 thinking. And that is really changing the way nonprofits are changing quickly and addressing social issues. Because I love the idea of marketing and communications changing social issues, making social impact.
Right, and then you've got a nonprofit that is able to raise some money to do the things that they want rather than relying on the funding from the NGOs or the governments, which, as we're feeling, can dry up.
Yep, and most of that funding of social projects in emerging markets is from government, which is still very, very important. But
Yes.
but a nonprofit in a market like Somalia, you're talking about Rwanda, and getting a different type of funding that can go and work on one specific social issue or build up an education system is a new dynamic that will help shape markets and futures.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Okay, so you're talking about communications and technology. So I want to hear a little bit about your history about communicating and translating and working with interpreters, and then jump into, what technology is doing for that, like what you're seeing in there. So back when you were living internationally and doing the global marketing, you're probably still doing it now. How did you typically handle the translations through the agencies for your clients?
So we had there are a few processes that take place when you are doing translations. And I say this somewhat tongue in cheek because I'm about a little bit distanced from the big network agencies, but we fought this challenge all the time, whether it was UPS or for General Motors across the Middle East, is headquarters wants to do it as cheaply as possible.
Yeah.
And that means in regions like the Middle East, they want to do word for word translations. So you hand it to a translator, or what we would now do is Google Translate, and that is a horrible way to do it. One is it doesn't read correctly, it doesn't read culturally, and very often the copy comes from the US, and Americans specifically, Europe not so much, but American copy, you don't realize how many colloquialisms you're using in your copy. And I love a great copywriter when they do that because it makes it warm and friendly, but it does not translate at all when you go to a region like the Middle East. My creative team in Dubai had a list on the wall of the top 10 things that Jen says that are ridiculous. And I didn't realize how much I was doing this, but I used to say, all right, I'll get out of your hair. They're like, what is this about your hair? So you know what I mean? Like you build that to build rapport and humanity, and you use it to maybe make a tense situation warm and friendly. And I didn't realize that until I lived there. But you really, what I have found is the best model for translations, other than my crazy one-liners, is we would often do a word-for-word translation on big volumes of copy to get the work done. And then we would use a specific in-house translator. And in Dubai, we had one on staff full-time on staff, not only the third-party translator, but it was so frequent that we needed to do this correctly because in Arabic, you actually have three forms of Arabic. You have female, male, and generic. And then you have different forms of Arabic in every Arabic speaking country. Saudi is different than UAE. So sometimes you have to do a trade off and say, our company is going to use Saudi Arabic everywhere it appears. But that means you already have three versions of Arabic on your website before you've even launched the site. And then it reads right to left. And then you have the English that reads left to right. So sometimes you have to make the tough choices. But we've always pushed that in the Middle East, you had to have all four to show that you're a legitimate, respectful company. And that was our position globally. English, female Arabic, male Arabic, and generic. Especially if it's a letter. Especially if it's a letter, you need to make sure it's addressed properly.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because you
Okay.
can't even get out of my hair in your letters.
I want that list of top 10 things, and we'll post it on the show notes, or I'll at least get a kick out of it. So if you can share it with me afterwards.
Yeah, it became funny. And then we found that my colleagues and I found that some of our colloquialisms in English are the same in Arabic or across the Middle East. So it was funny how close the cultures really are in a world that wants to keep us separated. We found they were similar.
Or there's a lot of, like we'll say, I've got goosebumps, but the literal translation Italian is chicken skin. When you have the little pricklies on your skin. So
I think that was on the list. I think that one was on the list too. You are funny. You're American. You're funny. I'm like, fun culture, really fun place to live.
Yeah. Okay. So a large company would have an internal person that they could afford to hire to do that language. But did you work with other ones where how else did you handle that?
So the Middle East was the only place where I've ever worked where we had a full-time translator. And it's because of the complexities of Arabic and it's because of the complexities of culture. But around the globe, we always hired a third party. We always hired an expert like yourself who would give us a recommendation on how to do the work best and most cost effectively. And very often that translator would say, we're going to do our first pass with word for word translation. And then based on the country that you're in, we're going to go in and revise that copy to be accurate and to be appropriate. And we would always give the translator a list of industry terms. So say you were going to do something, I'm going to pick more of a B2B. Say you were doing something for Microsoft and you were doing B2B, the translator would always ask for a list of terms and how that company wanted those words translated so it was consistent and within your brand guidelines. And very often the local clients would also get involved in making sure that that was right for each country, or you'd pick something that could work across all cultures. But those terms were absolutely important for a translator to do their best work and to always do their best work for you.
Right. Yeah. In the industry, we call that a glossary. And so it certainly will do at Rapport International, we'll do that and try and set up a glossary, and we'll make sure that we're capturing it and using the same translator. Because that's were the companies good about using the same translator over and over, or would they go off to whoever was available and then provide the glossary?
You want a long-term relationship. You really want a long-term relationship. And I know that when you and I have talked about working together, getting that series of terms of UN terms like multilateral, sustainable development goals. Sometimes you will make agreements with the translator where that term will stay in English, even when it's in Chinese or Japanese or Arabic. You will sometimes say this is, the consumer is savvy enough to know that they're dealing with either an American company or a Western Roman character company, that is also fine and best practice depending on the industry.
Yeah, we've had that with patent translations before, where it's a new word. So they have to choose whether they want to use a word that translates into. Do they want to come up with a new word that then would carve the space out, or do they want to keep it in the original language? So there is a lot of strategy that goes behind it if you're trying to patent something or go to market.
And that's why working with the local markets is so important. I think that when you're I've been at the global level, I've been at the regional level, I've been at the local level. So I can really feel the pain when global teams think that the recommendations of local teams is just a nice to have. In some cases, it is mission critical, and it's very hard to have that conversation through layers of people. You must set up, if you're going to do if you have a global team in advertising agencies or with multinationals, that you really respect the local feedback, because sometimes it can be incredibly offensive, the word that you use. It could be an image that's absolutely inappropriate, especially in Muslim countries. Or it could be an image like a clock that's absolutely inappropriate to use in most East Asian cultures because it represents death versus time. So all of that is so critical, whether it's images, copy, translations, and to really leverage the expertise of the local teams versus there being just a nice to have. It can really destroy your brand. Otherwise, and if you listen to them, you have powerful local communications that make impact.
Yeah. What's the worst cultural or translation or communications mistake you've seen?
I won't mention the client.
No.
No. So, working in Malaysia and many countries around the globe, there's a local advertising board. And you have to recognize that countries like Malaysia are not technically Muslim countries, but they certainly have certain cultural requirements. Not Sharia law specifically, like the Middle East. But I saw one of my clients who really didn't listen to my regional team or to the Malaysia local team take advertising that showed a woman from behind with shoulders showing and no head cover. And there's certain things you can do, but that was 3 no-nos. And go to place that ad without going through the local advertising board or recognizing that you cannot put those things in imagery. And I had to make the decision as the leader of the Asia Pacific team to call headquarters, not mine, but the client's headquarters. And so we had to figure out globally how to report it back and say, the advertising board in Malaysia will eliminate this multinational company from ever advertising in Malaysia again. And I love talking about Malaysia because my clients taught me so much about global marketing, not just with Nestle, but others. But I think that's a good example of where a senior client in the region just wants to push something through and doesn't realize how impactful it could be for the entire company. And to me, that's still the example that I use of what is inappropriate, inconsiderate, and you have to kind of put some standard operating procedures around reviews to make sure that you are not getting eliminated by the government advertising board. A bad mistake that we were able to offset before it happened.
Oh my gosh.
Uh-huh. That was
We
daily.
got to the woman's shoulder. I went, oh no.
And Malaysia is not a very strict country, but they do have
No.
some basic rules, and they have the government board there to prevent things from happening and to make sure that companies have a place to guide them. It's in doing advertising there is spectacular because you have certain operating procedures in place to help provide those guide rails. As new companies come to the country, they're not making mistakes. They've got a board that will help guide them. So that was a good place to cut your teeth when you really
Yeah.
want to learn about specific
Oh,
issues
that's
and
good.
problems.
Yeah. So rather than looking at it as multicultural, it's going to be more difficult. It's really a contained country with guidance that it's a good place to cut your teeth. Yeah. Huh. How about the kind of craziest global marketing campaign that you've worked on that was successful?
I'm going to talk about Microsoft. I wasn't technically on Microsoft in Asia Pacific, but I started to become quite good and respected in how to communicate local creative differences back to the US. And Microsoft was pushing Office 365, which we all now know and love, but they were communicating the benefits of Office 365 versus their competitors at the time around the globe. And the US came up with, the San Francisco team came up with a campaign called Dinosaurs. And here's a great example of an item or image that doesn't resonate the same way in every country. But our global team of Microsoft really listened. And I thought that was great. They were trying to demonstrate in this campaign by showing dinosaurs that their competitors were out of date. So you and I, growing up in the US, think of dinosaurs and the image as being old, extinct. So that immediate image made a lot of sense. And for
Yeah.
most markets, it made a lot of sense. It was basically saying, you're a dinosaur if you're using anybody other than us. I loved the idea. And a lot of markets around the globe loved the idea. And what I really respected about our creative team in San Francisco is, unlike a lot of our other pieces of business that might only call a few markets for input, they asked for input from every market, because this was a huge launch and they're very globally minded. In Japan, for example, and this was then, may not be now, the idea of a dinosaur was like a cartoon character, so it didn't translate. So
Oh,
in some markets, we could say, don't be extinct like a dinosaur, so we changed the copy. But in some markets, there was no direct coalition and we had to do a completely different execution. But because they listened to the team and because I had learned over 5 years how to communicate back to headquarters, we actually changed the campaign in certain markets, and we gave local markets the opportunity and the freedom to adapt the campaigns. That was very, very smart, and it was very expensive, but it was a very expensive launch. And clearly it was
yeah.
worth it in the long run. It's funny, I ran into my Microsoft client when I worked at BBDO, different agency, on a different client, and I was working on Visa. And he said, I remember your emails. And he and I had never met in person before. He said, I remember your emails because they would say, ask Jen to send something over, because I was usually pretty honest. This campaign won't work, kill it. Or in this case, I said, I think you need to adapt this campaign because the idea is powerful and it will resonate if you let the local markets make the changes. So we use
Do you
that as a,
remember some of the local markets and what they adapted it into?
some of them like the idea of the cartoon character thing. So they leveraged the cartoon character and did it more like a 3D and kind of 3D design. And they liked that idea for small businesses because it wasn't so overly serious. So some turned up the humor in certain markets.
Okay, so the competitors are kind of a joke, and so the dinosaur would. Oh, okay.
Certain markets that are really into animation, like the Koreas and Japans, could play on that because that's so a part of the culture.
Yeah,
Some took it exactly as is, and they just changed the copy to make the connection between extinct and out of date a little more clear. Uh, some repositioned where the artwork was because of how people read top to bottom versus right to left or left to right. So all of that made a big impact, but it's a
right.
trillion gazillion dollar business now. And that kind of launch required and deserved that type of investment.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
cool, right? It's a very cool case study.
It is absolutely a cool case study. We did a tagline for Staples, and they were talking about refrigerator art, which works in the United States because it's art you hang on your refrigerator, your kids art. But in France, you don't do that. So the French translator brought back, this isn't a thing. So we could work with the client and come up with an adaptation. And they had a bunch of other options that they were going to use across the campaign. So they just killed that one in the French language. But
Whoa.
it's, that translator is your first conduit of cultural information to come back.
But when you think about a big global campaign, the strategy can still be done globally because the idea was what you're using is dead. It's extinct. What we're doing is new and will grow. That still in that creative concept and the insight was, the consumer can't make this thing work. We need a SaaS solution, or whatever that insight was still relevant. The idea of the dinosaur as the image may not have been the only one. Doesn't mean the global campaign wasn't completely on strategy. And that's when you can really show the power of a global team versus a lot of clients saying, well, we just want everything done centrally. Well, maybe, maybe not. Maybe, maybe not.
Yes, yeah. So you're working with all sorts of people that are doing global marketing, and oftentimes people will have fears about getting into global marketing. Obviously, you didn't because you were drawn so young into it. What are some of the fears that you've seen your clients or coworkers experience about doing global marketing?
I don't think it's the staff that has fear of doing global marketing. What I don't see enough of that I had the chance to do is sending their growing employees around the globe. And companies and agencies don't invest in that enough. I had so many amazing staff members in different parts of the globe say, I want to move to Asia, or my Asian team wanting to move to London. And I don't think we do enough of that. And some companies will do 6 months at a different location, or even in a different role, in a completely different department. And those companies that do that are more globally minded, and they're better in turn at global business, which makes them better at global marketing.
Ah, right, right.
So the only reason I got to go overseas is when I worked at McCann, the McCann Erickson advertising agency, not MRM. I was part of the direct marketing. We sat in the basement kind of group. Now digital is everything, but at the time we weren't the priority company. McCann had a 6-month transfer program to go somewhere overseas. And I was the first non-McCann person from one of the other sister companies to go on that. And I was sent to Sydney. And I decided not to stay in Sydney. I was sent up to a regional meeting in Singapore, and I just never left. I didn't even go home. I had a house in Michigan. I sold it. My friend took my car and sold it for me. I just never left. And I think if we did more of that,
Yeah.
we would be, our younger employees would be more committed. They'd learn certain skills. It would force organizations to train better, to talk about cross-cultural communications. And I think that is the biggest failure right now. It's not a fear of the employees. They want it. It's a fear of the organizations and investing in it.
Yeah, that's so fascinating. And I have a full belief that every kid should do an exchange program while they're going up through the American school system to get that international experience because it changes your life.
All
You
of
know,
my college friends went overseas for a semester and I didn't. And I never thought I'd get that opportunity. I went around the globe twice. It was exhausting, but I did it. Don't do it like I did. Don't do six international moves in a decade. Don't do that.
oh, I know. Well, we did when I was young. We lived three places and in well, I'll have to add it up, but less than a decade.
Wow.
But my parents were responsible for the moves. I just had to show up at the new schools and the new cultures and figure all that out. So it is life changing. Yeah. So let me tie you back to, you're really into technology and AI, and we were talking about translation. Where are you seeing technology take global communications?
There are so many major technology innovations, and it's not just AI. I
Right.
was talking 20 years ago in Asia about augmented reality, virtual reality, mixed reality. Of course, now every meeting I go to, there's a QR code. I went, well, finally.
Yeah.
And AR has never really taken off here the way it has in other parts of the world. Um, AI is certainly what everybody's talking about, and I'll answer your question in a moment. But I was just at UN General Assembly Week and at Foreign Policy's day-long seminar on AI and data transformation. And there's also quantum computing. There are a number of other innovations that are shifting everything, but everybody's hyper-focused on AI, which isn't a bad thing, but it's not the only, it's not the new, it's a new shiny object.
Right.
I think that AI may be the great equalizer as global communications continue to expand. I think that there is a big growth in AI creative studios. Both Demand Bright that I work with and a couple of other independent agencies have created AI creative studios that are helping them adapt faster, better, smarter, and do it culturally. I think that if you use AI creative tools correctly, you can identify and have the data to report back to global to say, see, even our data and AI tools are saying this isn't appropriate for this culture. I think if you use them correctly, they don't have to replace the creative ideas that will never be surpassed by technology. Our great creative minds are still our great creative minds, but they will help you overcome bias. They will help you overcome cultural issues and identify them, and they can help validate the impact of what that campaign or that translation can be. So I say harness it to not justify what the point you want to take, but to help you look at things holistically and to identify barriers to speed great creative ideas to market.
Yeah. Yeah, that was really good insights. That's I see so many companies saying, "Oh yeah, we're now in AI da 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 da," and I'm like, AI is just the tool. It's just the tool. What are you giving me? I don't want you to give me AI. I want you to give me a solution. So yeah, good
And what
answer.
version of AI are you talking about? I've sat in a lot of meetings, get my mouth shut, but I won't hear a lot of people who don't know what they're talking about saying the same three sentences about AI. But when I got into that foreign policy meeting, they were all top-notch people who had the right points, that were looking at great solutions, not only for marketing, but for social innovation and partnerships between business and governments on how to harness the power to do great things business-wise, as well as social, impacting social issues. So there's still a lot of positive, great people who are driving great change.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's good to hear. We have run out of time and I have like 50 more questions to ask you. So we're obviously going to have to get together for lunch or re-record another podcast.
I
But
love that.
this question's coming up at the end. What's your favorite foreign word?
Well, since I talked about get out of my hair when I lived in Dubai, I'll talk about the word that I loved most when I lived in Singapore, and I lived there twice. The word is angmo, A-N-G, and the next word is mo. So it's really one word, sometimes two. It's Hokkien for redheaded devil. And it's what us white expats from the West are called, somewhat affectionately and sometimes not affectionately. But it's really to refer to all the Westerners that come barreling in to Asia, and as they would say, on things and leave. That's what they would say. It's my favorite word, and I love Hokkien because the phrases that I know are all very colloquial and very funny. So my sincere love to all of my colleagues and friends in Singapore who use that word occasionally.
Oh my gosh, that is such a good one. It reminds me of the moving company Gentle Giant.
Oh,
And
yeah.
so, in the US, it has we'll be gentle with your stuff, but we're a giant, so we can move it strongly. Well, the owner of that is a tall guy, very fit. And he said, "Oh, what I want to do is get a t-shirt made in China that says Gentle Giant on it." And so the guy looks at him and he ends up, there's no translation for Gentle Giant, and he couldn't get the meaning quite right across, or however they were communicating, and he ended up putting something on the shirt. And my friend was walking around and people were looking at him and laughing, and he gets back to the hotel and he says, "What does my shirt say?" And it says, "Large homosexual man."
See, see, the thing is people don't realize that across Asia, the Middle East, Eastern Europe, they all know about American culture. They know what it really means in our culture, but it's how funny it is in theirs. And there's a great sense of humor about our
Great sense of
strange ways.
humor. Yeah.
Well,
Yeah, yeah. Well, where can people reach you if they'd like to know more?
So you're welcome to find me on LinkedIn. Just search Jen Faucon, and it will also say Masters of Ed, MBA. You can also email me at jfaucon@live.com. And I'm always speaking with American Marketing Association, so you can always find me at our in person at our networking events and education events. I have one on virtual production on October 30th at my friend's agency called Adventures, their Door G virtual production studio on the 30th. We'd love to see you there.
Okay, and so everybody who's listening knows Jen's name is Jen, and then Faucon is Faucon. Con. So certainly find her on LinkedIn or her email, and we'll put that in the show notes. So thank you for tuning in and listening. These are some great stories. If you know somebody who does global marketing, send this episode off to them so they can hear the real practical advice that Jen has shared on this. And of course, give us a 5-star rating and follow us so you make sure and catch new episodes coming out. So thanks so much for tuning in. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Global Marketing Show. We started this podcast to capture the stories of people who do global marketing and work for companies that export, since those companies have higher revenues, higher profits, higher valuations, higher salaries, and more stability, according to the U.S. Department of Commerce. If you enjoyed this podcast episode, please leave a review and subscribe. And if you know somebody who would be a good guest, introduce them to me, your host, Wendy Pease. If you'd like to learn more about global marketing or language translation and interpretation, visit Rapport International's Resource Center at www.rapport translations.com. Au revoir. Hasta luego. Ciao for now.